Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Soul Rising podcast. I am your host, Amanda McCoy Flanagan. I am so happy that you've joined me. And if this is your first time, welcome to the show. We are all in on love, loss, and connection here. Today, I have my beautiful, wonderful, soulful friend, Diane Schroeder, who has an awesome story to share with us today and trials, tribulations, joys, all this good stuff. A lot of life transitions. We're going to jump into that in a minute, but let me tell you a little bit about Diane and then we'll get rolling. Diane Schroeder retired after fulfilling a 24-year career in the fire service, bringing her passion for leadership, self care, writing, and authentic conversations into her next chapter. She specializes in helping people navigate life transitions, which we're going to talk about, offering support and partnership through the messy moments. When Diane is not working with others, you can find her chasing live music, which we have a lot in common there, getting lost in a good book, exploring new destinations, or spending time with people, fueling the fire inside her. Welcome, Diane. So happy to have you.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for the kind words. I am just looking forward to this conversation and catching up because.
Yes, definitely. It's been a little while since we've seen each other, but I'm just so blessed. We actually were introduced for the listeners. We were introduced by a friend that I actually went to preschool with and all of school up through high school. And she met Diane in a writing, right? It was a writing course.
Yep, a writing salon.
Yeah, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, my friend Amanda lives right near," and I just reconnected with Danielle.
Yep.
I hadn't spoken to her in a while. I was reached out to find out some tips and stuff about podcasting because she was the only person that I knew at the time that had a podcast. So, yeah, I'm so grateful that she connected us because you're just one of those real deal, salt of the earth, like, t awesome. I
Well,
love the energy.
thank you. And I love it too. And it is. It's just like, when you meet your people, you just
Mhm,
know. And
mhm.
it's such a universal lesson, right? Like just be yourself and the people who are meant to come into your life come into your life.
100%. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey, a little bit about your story and kind of what brought you to where you are now and why you're so passionate about the work you're doing.
Oh man. Okay. Well, I born and raised in Colorado, grew up in a blue collar neighborhood. My dad was a volunteer firefighter. And so I just, it's interesting because at the time, younger Diane, I just wanted to make my parents happy. I experienced quite a bit of childhood trauma that no one knew about at the time when I was a child. So I became very much a people pleaser. I was pretty much invisible. So if I was invisible and I kept everyone happy, then life was okay. And so my grandmother was a key caregiver in my life. And when I got close to graduating high school, she started to suffer from dementia. And I couldn't leave her. I was going to go away to college and do all the things, but I didn't want to leave her. So I decided to get in the fire service and got hired young. And that is where I spent the last 24 years of my life. And I realized that it was just a continuation of my childhood of, just trying to make people happy and, being defensive. I was very protective of really being my own true self. And then
Mm,
about halfway through my fire service career, I went through a really awful, difficult time. It was a high profile, very high conflict, nasty divorce.
mhm,
Um, and it broke me. It shattered me. I say that it wasn't just rock bottom, it was the crawl space of rock bottom. It was professionally and personally a really difficult time. And I had an option, I had a choice. I could rebuild my life the way I had been doing it, or I could do something different. And I decided to lean into authenticity. I decided to lean into the gifts from the amazing women in my family tree and really just rebuild with me and my son in mind. And that was kind of it changed everything. I ended up leaving the first apartment that I was with for almost 20 years and went to another smaller organization. And once you do that, once you make the commitment, and I'm sure you can relate to this of I'm going to be me, all of me, and I'm going to be authentically me. And if you don't like it, that's not a me problem. That's something you can deal with.
yeah.
It My tolerance and acceptance of anything less than being genuine and being authentic from other people really dwindled. Like I just couldn't. I couldn't see past the BS. And then I lost my dad. He passed away in January of 2020. So, I mean, we all know 2020 was a shit show for a
Mm,
lot of reasons and many years after that. And
mhm,
so that like kicked off COVID for me. And so there was a lot of grief. And while I thought I had done a lot of the work when I went through my divorce, there was more that I needed to do.
mhm,
So I went in deeper and did a lot more work on me, and kind of letting go of the rocks that I had been carrying that I no longer needed to carry, which led to, I met I moved well, my son and I at the time were living in a fixer upper, and in 2021, I met my now husband, which was a game changer because I didn't think that was ever gonna happen again. I didn't think it was possible, and he and I met each other where we were in life's journey, and, it was just instantly magic. And then a year and a half ago, I retired from the fire service. It's all very condensed, like the Reader's Digest version. But by far, the last couple of years have been a lot of transitions. I sold my house, we moved in together, we got married, and I retired from the fire service and decided that I was going to take a gap year in my mind. That's what I told myself. And really, it was like another like invitation of, girl, there's some more work I need to do.
mhm. Always, always more.
It never freaking ends, and
Never.
just figuring that out, and now, this journey of, okay, I really enjoy not working, in, the construct of, for a boss, and I
Mm.
wanna do my own thing, and that's kinda where I'm at.
Well, that's amazing. And first of all, did you start fighting fires when you were like 10? Because to be 44 years in a career and look so young,
Oh, you're so
have it.
kind. You're so kind. Actually, I'm much older than I look. I started at 23. I got hired when I was 23. But really, there isn't a moment in my life that the fire service was not part of my life.
Yeah.
Because my dad was a
Yeah.
volunteer, so I was always at the firehouse. He had bunker boots in the kitchen, which now to think of, like, bunker boots don't go anywhere in a living space. Um, so it was just like it's where we spent holidays. It's where I would crush on the boys in high school that,
Uh-huh.
would help me
Uh,
practice for the physical agility test. So yeah.
so there are a couple of things that you said in there, and I do want to talk about the big transitions, but I also want to touch on when you said that your career as a firefighter was just an extension of the childhood trauma. Like, isn't that interesting how we consciously recreate the same situations?
Oh,
Like, right? The people pleasing, the saving others. That's like such a fire person's mentality, right?
yep.
And being in traumatic situations.
Mhm.
You chose to put, whether it was conscious or unconsciously, to be in situations where you were thrust into more trauma. I
Oh,
think
yeah.
that's interesting.
Oh, it's fascinating. When you said that, I got full body goosebumps because the career is sold as you get to be a hero, you get to go into burning buildings and save lives, and, like, it really was misleading as to what the job truly was. It
Mm,
was, a lot of sleep, it was survival mode for most of my life, it was being tired, and it was the trauma. So much trauma, very little fire, and
uh-huh.
just a lot of, helping people in their worst moments. And
Yeah,
not
because you guys,
having Oh, go
you
ahead.
see, right? I just want to, for listeners, a lot of people don't know that firefighters don't just fight fires.
No.
You respond to everything.
Yes, when people have exceeded their ability to handle their problem, whatever that problem is, whether it's they can't reach a light bulb or a smoke detector, or someone they're living with fell down the stairs or had a heart attack or a car accident or a fire, they call 911 because the fire department and EMS will be there within 10 minutes. And you can't get that kind of service really anywhere in the world
Yeah,
except
yeah,
through the fire department. And I was paramedic for 17 years during my fire service career. So, yeah, I just exposed myself to all kinds of trauma buckets.
yeah. Yeah, and I'm sorry I interrupted you. I don't
No,
know if you remember what you were the flow where you were going with what you were saying.
I sure don't.
We're so sorry. I should know not to do that because that's how I am. It's like
No,
if
it's okay. I lost it. That's
that
okay.
shows that we're present, right?
Wait, yes. Okay, I do remember. It was the fascination of moving into a business of, like, And I didn't realize all the trauma that I had been exposed to as a child until probably in my early 20s, I started to connect some of the dots. And then, it really was like, oh, that's not normal. My childhood wasn't normal. My mom is an alcoholic and she drank my entire childhood. And it wasn't until my early 30s that she stopped drinking. So that was really heavy to carry as well because again, I didn't know, like, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah,
You just
exactly.
live
Yeah.
in the environment you're in.
Yeah, and that becomes normal because you have to normalize it, right?
Mhm,
Psychologically as a
mhm.
child. It doesn't feel good. Normalizing something does not equate to feeling good.
No.
Healthy, but we adapt and we adjust to the environment that we're in,
Mhm,
which really beautiful segue into the conversation that we're going to have about these huge, big life changes, upheavals, transitions
mhm.
that we're not necessarily prepared for, but we're thrust into anyway, and we have to figure it out and normalize it and adjust and adapt. I mean, we are such adaptable creatures. I think that's one of the things about being human that really blows my mind the most is how we can adapt to anything. And very shortly after we go through the successful adaptation, we kind of forget what it was like before. It's almost like I can't ever remember being who I was before who I am now. It's very interesting. And our brains, I think, just do that for us to keep moving and living and surviving.
Absolutely. I think it's evolution. Trauma, when it happens to you, your body's like, okay, this isn't good, but I'm going to protect you. So they it fragments the trauma in different places, which is, why when you have flashbacks or something happens or something triggers you, it may not make sense. Like, why did that song trigger me? I don't even understand because your body is so amazing and
Yeah.
the brain is so amazing at separating all of that stuff. So yeah, I didn't know. You don't know. And even during my career, for most of my career, I was like, oh, this is just normal. It's normal to, see people on their worst day or dead bodies or, just horrific things
Yeah.
that I had just shoved down.
Yeah. And we're pretty fragile creatures,
Yeah.
like we are resilient. We're definitely resilient. But before the resilience, the fragility is there. So when the trauma happens, it's doing something internally, whether we're aware of it or not. It's
Yeah.
getting in there. It's lodging itself in there. And especially as a kid,
Uh-huh.
that core stuff.
Hmm.
I mean, as you know, in the work that you're still doing and the work I'm still doing is kind of, with all this rewiring and
Hmm.
undoing and kind of like an unlearning, but more of just like a reprogramming, you
Yeah.
know? Like we may not even need to unlearn, we can just program on top. And that will
Right.
automatically get rid of those other pathways that keep us stuck in those trauma responses.
Yes.
They're not helpful for navigating big transitions.
No, no, and
Necessary.
it I've tried them all, for the most part of the unhealthy and the healthy, and I will say the unhealthy is a lot easier, but not sustainable.
No, no.
So, it's not it doesn't work long term,
Mm.
and the healthy habits to create that and really, um learn to live with, and I think that's the biggest thing I've learned with all these transitions that I've been through, whether obviously the big one with the career transition, but through divorce, through being a single mom, through moving so many times, is it's not that I need to do the work to forget what happened or change the past. It's acknowledging it and living with it and just seeing it for what it is. And also seeing me for who I was during that time and not, you know, beating myself up for a version of myself that did the best I could during those times.
Yeah, trying to
Mhm,
embrace reality as best as we can, regardless of how painful it is. And I know you're that way, and I'm that way. Like, I can't not, like I can, maybe I can avoid it for a little bit, but then something just keeps knocking. And no, Amanda, like I'm going to get your attention and you're going to deal with this and face the pain of the reality because when I bring you through, whatever my spirit, whatever's bringing me through,
mhm.
gonna be really good. It's gonna be it's just a part of my soul's evolution. So, like, I have to face the reality. I cannot live in denial about things, and I know I'm in denial right now about something that I don't know, right? I don't know I'm in denial, but I know I'm in denial. Like there's just more is always revealed. Um,
Mhm.
but when it is revealed, it's that ability to grab it and hold on to it. When it's almost just like a little sensing. Do you have that experience?
Yes, it's learning to trust yourself, but it's that be all in on yourself. Like,
Ah,
literally, I always say the universe will, like, give you a whisper or a nudge and that, whatever wherever you feel it. For me, I feel it in my gut or I feel it in my chest. And, you can ignore it for so long, but then it gets louder and then it gets louder, and then it's like, "All right, Mother Nature always wins. The universe will always
oh,
win." So
foolish.
you'll get this big, like, boom if you don't pay attention. So once you have a few of those big moments, I think for me, I just like, "Oh, I should tune in." Like there's something is trying to tell me to listen and
Mhm.
to really honor that. And it's gotten easier over the last few years because I've really tapped into my feminine energy. I think part of all of the most of my life I have lived in a very masculine world. I worked in a very 96% male dominated profession. So it's always been that masculine energy. And the feminine energy was like shoved aside. Like I couldn't rely on my soft side when I was just trying to survive for so long. So now, like, welcoming that back in has changed so many things and how I process and how I navigate these transitions of just experiencing that softer side, that feminine energy, the woo, the crystals, the
Yeah,
meditation, the tarot cards, all the things that have really helped bring me closer to my myself, I guess is,
yeah.
kind of the woo answer.
Yeah, I love that, and the divine feminine. I mean, we're so lucky to be alive right now. We're experiencing the rise of that and the awareness of it, the embracement of it, the acknowledgement that it's not just like feminine, like I am woman, hear me roar,
Right.
it's masculine balanced with the feminine. And we've
Mhm.
been using both of them in entirely wrong ways. And to the point where a lot of women are feeling like they have to show up as masculine, right?
Yeah.
Is not how this whole healing of our planet is going to happen.
Right.
You don't need to do that. We need to stand in our feminine power and let that be enough as females. Not that we have to be like men.
Right. Well, and that I mean, I did not learn that lesson until maybe a couple of years ago, maybe like right before I retired when cuz I tried so hard to fit in, to be accepted by the guys. It started when I first got hired. I'd keep my mouth shut or I would say, more inappropriate jokes. I'm a tomboy. I've definitely there's no
Yeah.
doubt like
No, yeah.
and I'm okay with that. And then I was like, "No, I don't really like these jokes," or,
Ring.
there's a different way. And so when I became a leader and I became an officer pretty young in my career and
You're a
then
chief.
just
Tell everybody you're a chief. Don't, you
Yeah,
know,
but I start
bashful.
yep, yeah, you have to start at the bottom. So I started
Yeah.
as a lieutenant and then worked my way up to captain and then battalion chief. And it was the more I embraced and trusted myself and how I led through authenticity, man, it made it a lot better. And I was like, oh, so you can be both. You can be a tomboy and still be feminine and embrace that. And I feel like even more recently, I've really leaned into more of that feminine side and just accepting of who I am. Like, yeah, I like sweatshirts and jeans. I like Pearl Jam t-shirt concert, that's like that's who I am. I'm not a big makeup, but that doesn't make me less feminine.
Exactly. And the feminine qualities come out not in the nails and the hair and the makeup and the this, it's in the love and the compassion and the kindness and the softness and the gentleness that we can bring to any situation
Mhm.
without sacrificing that leadership,
Yes.
right? It's like being able to encompass all of it, and that's the beauty of being female, where it's really difficult to be a woman, right? Because I actually think the women's movement kinda screwed us a little bit because now do we not only have to do the dishes and take care of the kids and birth the babies, we have to also work. Well, men kinda got away. I think they kinda missed the boat on the messaging of all of that,
Yes.
right? Because the men still are just allowed to bring home the paycheck, and that's
Yes.
acceptable.
It's fascinating you say that because after I retired, that has been my whole mantra. I can do it all. I can kick ass in a male dominated profession. I can, remodel my house. I can be a single mom. I can do it all. So I took on that identity of,
Uh-huh.
it's really cool to say you're a chief in the fire service. Like that's sexy. And then when I retired, I was like, so what do I do now? Like, what is my identity? And I knew that it wasn't who I was, but I didn't know how to break up with it. And so then there was a lot of unworthiness and shame that I went through of like, am I even worthy to not work for a paycheck? And am I failing all the other women in the world by depending on a man
Mm.
for financial stability and food on the table and try to do my own business? And yes, I instantly fell into Susie Homemaker. I would make sure I did all the laundry. So I was overcompensating. And I'm like, wait a minute, this is not how it should be. But it was all so unconscious. I didn't even know I was doing it for probably the first 6 or 7 months.
Yeah, well, you were trying to find yourself, and that was a safe identity to fall back into because I know I watched my husband retire from the fire department, and
Yeah.
that I mean, many careers provide identity for a lot of people, but it seems to be when you're in that, first responder
Mhm.
role, whether you're a police officer, a firefighter, paramedic, whatever you're, even a nurse or a doctor,
Yeah.
right? These helping professions where what you're doing is making such a difference, it becomes such a part of you.
Mhm.
Very difficult. So let's talk about that a little bit. So what did that look like for you transitioning out of that? Yes, we talked so with Susie Homemaker, all that. So was that just like a natural response? Where do you think that came from? And did you have any other less healthy responses when we talk about like trauma response?
I was a complete bitch. I will say that I was angry. I was well, in premenopause, like, I have to say that
Oh,
I might
yeah.
have sprinkled some of it in there. Um,
Holy crap, is that real? Oh my god, I'm on
oh,
it, on the journey right now. Take this pill, take that pill, do this, do that. It's
yeah. So, like, first it was I I'm very logical and I have to have the information, but I don't if I don't know what information I need, it kind of leaves this void. So, at first I was like, "Okay, I just need to learn how to sleep." If I can get good sleep hygiene and, sleep at a normal rate, then that'll make everything better. So I started with sleep and I realized, okay, well, that's not working. Again, throw in some hormone stuff there.
Mhm.
Um, and just like not even recognizing how bad I felt. My body felt like my knee joints hurt, everything hurt. And so it was like this letdown. And to top it all off, I was dealing with um, a potential cancer scare in my thyroid. So it's right before I retired, I got a physical and they're like, "Oh, you need to get this nodule examined. It's larger than normal. It could be thyroid cancer." Well, shit. That's exactly what I needed after,
That's
so that kinda hung over my head, so I think I was just kind of angry and frustrated, and I wasn't great to be around. Like, my husband, bless his heart, and we got married, like, 4 months after I retired, but it wasn't really until, I would say, a year after I retired that I just I don't know, something shifted and I gave myself a little more grace. And my therapist obviously helps tremendously of like gently pointing out the things, that maybe I should consider. I started really doubling down on my self-care. I preach self-care, I believe in self-care, and yet I wasn't taking
mm,
care of myself and nurturing myself because I had all these other messy like guilt and unworthiness. But really when I started consistently getting into a routine and honoring what I wanted, genuinely wanted, not what I thought everyone else wanted for me. I kind of expected like everything to just fall into place, but that's not how the world works. You can't rely on the world or other people to fall into place to make it easier for you. I had to change. And once I started to like just embrace that I don't have to have all the answers right now. I'm safe, I'm secure, and I can follow my curiosity to lead where I will end up. That is where the big difference kind of the shift really happened to where I'm like, okay, I can be retired.
yeah, so honoring, welcoming, embracing, like, all parts of you is kind of what I'm hearing and tapping into the feeling in a softer, less judgmental less shame-based way of like, "Okay, this is how I'm feeling, and it's okay." And I think that speaks to that divine feminine energy.
Mhm.
We
Mhm.
are being a female and whatever our ancestors had to the road they had to travel, the difficulties they had to go through,
Yeah.
and we'll conjure that up because it's natural. It's
Yeah.
like it's there, even though they had to survive, right? Like before listeners, before we got on, we were talking about that, how like this survival instinct, this need to survive to keep us out of this softness or gentleness or whatever, that didn't end on a pretty consistent basis until a couple of generations ago, I guess, but they didn't know how to step into the new space, and our generation is kind of the first one, I feel like, that is
Yeah. I think we're the cycle breakers, and that was really a big piece of it for me. So, I really leaned into my family root and kind of where I came from and followed the lineage. And I say, and I talked about this when I gave my TED Talk a few years ago, that I come from a long line of badass women. Like, the women in my family are amazing and strong, but I knew that, but I didn't really know why, and I didn't put the pieces together. And I go back to my grandmother, my mom's mom, were Cherokee, and she was born in Oklahoma with her siblings, and her older sister, who was like 12 months older, 14 months older, went away and went to college. And my grandmother had to go to a boarding school, an Indian boarding school, which was very traumatic. And that's where she spent high school. Was she got her diploma in home economics
Mm,
in the early 1920s, and
yeah,
then or in the mid 1920s, and then went to college and met my grandpa. So her life, I can't even imagine because she didn't really talk about it, and she was a very intimidating woman. She was very stern, very like, my mom called her the warden. She passed away 10 years ago at almost 100, but it makes sense to me. Of course she was. She was surviving.
that's it.
And she made sure that my mom and her sisters all were college educated in the 50s and 60s, which think about that. Back in, for women, she
Yeah,
made sure that happened, but there was none of that emotional support. So, I think, okay, well, that makes sense why my mom was the way she was.
yes,
And my grandmother, my other grandmother on my dad's side, her husband was killed in World War II. So my dad's dad was killed in World War II when he was 4 months old. And then she's a single mom in the 40s. She
yeah,
was college educated, but that was not acceptable because she couldn't do anything else without a man. She couldn't buy a house. She couldn't, so she had to get remarried, and the person she remarried wasn't very kind, apparently. And I didn't know him because he passed away before I died. So I think about like just the two generations. And then I had my parents. And there wasn't a lot of like emotional intelligence or like, how are you feeling? Or,
yeah,
like, let's talk about this. you
yeah.
know,
Dinner table conversations
that's
are night and day.
and they were in survival mode. They had 3 kids. My older brother's 11 years old, so they were always just working and hustling. Like, it was not like, you know, the environment that I try to provide for my kid. And I don't even know at what point you decide you're gonna become a cycle breaker. Um, I think,
Yeah,
like,
I don't know if it's a decision. I think it's just something that is in you
yeah.
and comes up against your own, you know, best effort to push it down.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, I was like,
Like,
I didn't choose it. I didn't choose
yeah,
it. I didn't be like, wake up one day and be like, "I'm gonna break the cycle." No, that was
yeah,
not.
yeah.
But
Painful
then
life events. That's why I'm a big proponent of suffering.
yeah,
To a certain
yeah,
degree, you suffer, you go through it, and then you don't have to suffer. But
right.
there is something beneficial about that suffering because it awakens you.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
all these philosophers, all these people who've been talking about what a spiritual awakening is,
Mhm.
9 out of 10 times comes after some kind of intensely painful event.
Absolutely. And that's in life in general. Like, that's personally, absolutely. But you think of, like when horrible things happen, the world changes, and the first thing that pops to my mind is 9/11. You know, for those few months after 9/11, it was a different world. I'm not sure what it was like to be in New York. I can't even wrap my brain around that. But I know for me, it was like, wow, we were kind to people. Like, people were nice. It was this shift. Then it goes back to kind of the way it was. Like, because
Yeah.
it's hard to keep that momentum or that understanding that, look, this is an invitation to do something different. After the theater shooting in Aurora, after, like there's been
Yeah.
a lot of significant events in my life professionally that I was like, "Oh, well, this should change the world. See how we can do better." But I think because it's hard to maintain that,
Well,
to
I
sustain
think
it.
it could be because as time marches on, people being human do things that hurt other people,
Yes.
right? Or like some other event happens that divides us again, right?
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
just hard to maintain that camaraderie is the word that pops in my mind. And we need each other. Like we're in
Yeah.
a state of needing each other. And then when we don't need each other as much, we stop being as kind to one another because we go back into these divisive, disconnected spaces of ego. The
Mm.
ego, oh, that's the challenge, right? The challenge is always about squashing the ego, and that's where that divine
Yeah.
feminine is going to come in
Yes.
to help people do that, right?
Yeah.
The ego serves us as well at times, right? But when it overcompensates for our fears and for
Mhm.
our insecurities, that's when that division comes in.
Yeah.
And I think that's just a natural human thing that doesn't have to be operating at the level that it is.
Right.
I think it's there to serve a purpose, but
Mhm.
it right, to keep us alive back in the day, right? But it's at a point, especially now, like today,
Yeah.
2025, where it's gonna be our ruin. So
Mhm.
I believe in doing this work, the work that you've done, these transitions and finding this beautiful divine feminine energy inside, this warmth, this compassion, this little self-love.
Mhm.
This is the answer. It's the
Agreed.
answer.
I agree, and, it's funny because what I realized towards the end of my career, when we say divine feminine, men have that divine feminine energy in them too.
Yes.
And you can still be tough. I believe 100% that the key to leadership is love. And I would tell my guys every shift how much I loved them, how much I missed them, how, did I always agree with them? No. Did they drive me crazy sometimes? Absolutely. But I loved them. And if you can lead with that, and it's hard because people will disappoint you, you will get your heart broken. But if you can always lead with love, I feel like that it may even sound a little hokey. It's just a game changer. And not just love for everyone else, but love for yourself and loving those parts of you that weren't perfect. And offering yourself that compassion, it gives you that foundation of, okay, you can do it. I read a quote the other day and it's really rattled my cage. It's like faith and fear both require you to believe in something you can't see. You
Mm,
get to choose what it is.
mhm.
And I was like, dang, how true is that? It's so much easier to lean into fear and worry and scarcity and protection. And like, that's going to be really hard. I don't want to do it. Or that like faith of, man, I can do hard things because
Mhm.
I, come from generations of people that have done hard things. And this is a gift to me to not only do the hard things, but make it better for future generations.
100%. Thank you for bringing that up. And I believe it just makes sense from a gambling perspective to bet on faith over fear
Yes.
because faith is about the open-hearted energy of receiving or the love, the kindness, all that, the high frequency energy. We have more of a chance of reaching those things that
Yeah.
we're trying to have faith to achieve, right?
Uh-huh.
First is, and I don't know, I'm probably saying this in a convoluted way because it's just all this mishmash in my mind. I think I might have ADD. I think I need to look into that next. But um the fear-based energy
Mhm.
is never gonna deliver anything.
Wow.
It just shuts down. It's just this, like, boom, right? This blockade, where the faith is an opening,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So, to bet on faith over fear is just, I think, the emotionally intelligent thing to do.
Agreed. It's oftentimes the harder thing to do because to believe in something, you need to see something out in the world to validate, like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And a good friend of mine had me do an exercise a few years ago. She said, write down 10 things that happened that didn't make any sense, that you can't explain. And she's like, that's faith.
Mm,
And that helped give me like context of, okay, that's, because I think growing up Catholic, like faith had a very different meaning than it does for me now.
yeah.
But fear
Explain
is
that. Go into that a little bit. What is that?
Well,
What
I mean, it was a fear-based religion, to be quite honest. It was, you will do this, this is what the Bible says, and this is, it was this God-fearing religion. So for me, when I was like, well, I have faith, but it was in a religious context, I think.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, and it was still based in really fear because you were told what you had to do and what the expectation was. At least that was my experience,
Oh,
growing up, like,
yeah.
stand up, kneel. And, you don't get to like debate or like have these questions or,
Yeah,
it was like, and it was leveraging the Bible to hold over as in a power over position. Yet fear is everywhere. You see it on the news, you see the doom, like you can validate your fear so much easier than you can validate your faith if that's what you're looking for. So I think that's why it's hard for people to say, "No, I have faith," and not faith in the religious, like you're going to go to heaven or hell context, but faith that there is a greater source out there that really wants to help you and align with you and provide everything that you need, but you've got to work with it. It's not just gonna
exactly.
happen.
I thank you so much for bringing that up. I've been listening to an audiobook, which is the first audiobook that I've ever listened to. I'm not patient enough to wait for it to come in the mail, library, like, I needed it, like, now, and it's Mary Magdalene Revealed by
Is
Megan
it
Markson.
Oh my gosh, that's why I have my tattoo. That is why I got my Mary Magdalene tattoo from that book, yes.
Oh, yes. So you know it, yes. And
Yes.
that's what I think the faith energy is more about.
Yes.
And the fear energy is the more patriarchal man like, this is how it is and this is what you have to do, where it's just more of this trusting in this beautiful source energy that's
Mhm.
benevolent and loving and kind and goodness and glorious and just wants the best for you. And that doesn't need to look like tons of money or a
Oh,
big house or, anything like that. It's a comfort and a peace inside.
yes.
Think that
Yeah.
when we just settle into that acceptance of being human, I think merged with spirit
Mm.
or like the excite, that whole like we're just human beings having a spiritual experience. Is
Yep.
that what it is? I don't even know, but
Something
yeah,
like that. Yep,
something
we
like that.
chose this. Yep.
That's who or spiritual beings having a human experience.
Yes. Yes,
That
that makes
makes
mhm.
more. That's exactly what I think is opens I just keep going to this just like there's just this beautiful spirit and source out there that wants you to feel settled and calm and comforted and loved. And that is success. That's the success of the human experience for me.
Absolutely, and I love that book so much. That book really was, it changed a lot of things and really helped me heal a lot of my, um religious, like, negativity towards faith. Like, "Oh, yeah, this makes more sense to me." The way she describes it and the interpretation of, Jesus' word, and also, like, how it was set in place a long time ago to use those words that were created out of this, loving space to make it a power over leverage, create the patriarchy, to keep people small, to literally cut things out of it that didn't serve them
Yeah.
instead of keeping the whole. It just was like, wow, okay, I see it now. And once you see it, it's hard to unsee it,
Yeah.
which is beautiful.
Yes. And hard, because then you have to do something about it. Right. Know
Yeah.
some I'm not that far into the book yet, but I'm really, really
Good.
excited that it's becoming more of like a mainstream sort of conversation. And this is what we've been waiting for as humanity to bring to the surface. I mean, and I've heard from other sources that Jesus wanted Mary to carry on his message,
Yeah.
and all this stuff that you're saying has been taken out of the Bible, like reincarnation. I don't know why. I'm curious as to the thinking behind that because I would think they could use that to instill more fear. Like,
Right.
you have to come back and do this again. You better be good now, you
Yeah.
know? Better
Yeah.
listen now because you need to go to heaven and come back and be happy and not suffer, right?
Yeah.
Like,
They missed that in the marketing meeting when it
yeah,
happened, and they were like, "Oh, well, what do we cut? What do we keep? Like, what's gonna be the biggest bang for our buck?" the reincarnation, like, it was, like, not really passionate on the table, so we're like, "Oh, we'll just leave that out."
That's great. The marketing meeting. Oh my god, yeah. Yeah, it's just there's so many big things happening out there in the energy in the field right now that is just so cool. And we weren't even going to talk about all of this. I just love how podcasts work. You start talking about one thing and then it just rolls into what
Oh.
we're supposed to be talking about, spirit. I felt like a little bit of like a zinging when you were talking about your dad before and like you very connected to spirit. And I feel like that's what spirit wanted us to get to.
There's no coincidences in life. My hire date in the fire service was January 31st, 2000, and my dad passed away on January 31st, 2020.
Wow.
It sent me, I mean, a dark place, right? Even dad and I had a bumpy relationship, um, to say it that way, but I see it very differently now that he's no longer with me. And I was able to heal a lot of things. And also, I know he's around me. Like, I know his energy is nearby. And I also knew that when he passed away, I wasn't going to stay in the fire service
Right.
for my full career. I didn't know what that was going to look like, but I knew I could manifest something. And it did. I mean, 2.5 years later, I had retired
Yeah,
after
and
he
it's
passed
a
away.
beautiful journey having that pained relationship, pained experience in childhood, going through trauma in a career, all that kind of stuff to deliver you to where
Mhm,
you are right now. Like you are such a perfect example of what trusting and having faith that
mhm.
those hard times are going to lead us to something better. So
Yeah,
tell us what you're doing now, Diane. What are you up to
okay.
now?
So now I am trying to figure it out. Okay.
And you don't have
I
time any right? If it's like, well, nothing.
I am
Catching
I
up
am
on some Netflix shows.
I am caught up on some of my favorites. No, I am really just being curious. I've always wanted to write. I've been writing since I was a little girl, and I love to write. And I was told you can't make a career out of writing and all those things. So it's really deconstructing that. So I spend a lot of
Right.
time writing. I love helping people navigate through transitions. I love having genuine conversations of like, okay, have you considered this? And really, specifically when you retire, and I think it's because it's fresh for me. And there were a lot of things that I didn't know when I retired, like, yeah, moving, divorce, those are awful, horrific things. And yet retirement is the one thing, and I think of my dad with this, you spend your whole life working so you can retire and have that freedom. And how many times, like how many people really talk about, okay, once you've got that financial security, what's the rest of it look like? What's your purpose? What's your meaning? What's your identity? How do you really take care of yourself and not be committed to working for the man, business for 40 years my dad did the same job and then he worked so hard to retire. And when he retired, he was like, I don't know what to do now. So he just sat in a
Mm.
chair. So
Yeah.
really,
So you did start to write a book and you need to finish this book because we need to host memoir writing retreats together.
I know.
That's
Yes.
what we
So
need.
I've always been a journaler. I've always written and I was like, I'm going to write a memoir about my fire service career and I'm going to also talk about the generational gifts. And I realized I got to some of the darker times and I couldn't write through that yet. Largely in part, my son is only 12. I haven't figured out a way to talk about that authentically without really pissing some people off. And those people I've decided I can't really piss off right now.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. I remember telling my editor, like, this is all I'm willing to say.
Yeah.
And if you're gonna push me, and now I know he didn't really care. It wasn't about him, but it wasn't like I had a publisher that they were like, hey, you have to write
Right.
this. But I said, I'm letting you know, like, please don't push me because this is as far as I'm willing to go. Like, I took me a long time to restore some of these relationships. I'm not willing to hurt anybody over this. And that's not the spirit of the book. The
Right.
spirit is love, compassion, forgiveness, love, all that from cover to cover. So there is a way to do it, just FYI. There is a way to do it where you don't have to hurt anybody. That's number one. And also, as you were talking, you said my son's 12. As I was researching memoir writing, another writer that I know, and also she's a hybrid publisher, she said, some people, they're not there yet. Like you might have more work to do, right? It might not be another 20 years, it might be another year or 2 or whatever, and then you can go back in and that book is going to be even better because
Yes.
you have that healing to offer.
So that's a much more concise answer of it's the memoir's there, it's in process. I've also been writing nonfiction like a crazy woman, and I love it so much, and that has helped me process a lot of other things
Uh-huh.
that I didn't even realize. I'm like, "I can make this fiction? Oh, sweet."
You said you were writing nonfiction, but you meant fiction. I thought that's what you
Oh,
meant.
yeah, sorry. So I've been writing fiction like a crazy person and
So
still the nonfiction. So I spend a lot of time writing various different things. I've also been going back to writing blogs. So I started blogging years ago. And so I'm like, oh, I should really get back into that. So I've been editing and getting ready to post a lot more of that stuff too.
and where can they find that? Listeners on the fireinsider.com?
Yep, thefireinsider.com. I also have a newsletter that I took a little hiatus from, but I'm getting back into that. So you can go to thefireinsider.com/newsletter and sign up for ramblings of, wisdom or stories and my podcast. So I've had a podcast for 2 years, but I don't know when this is going to air, but it will probably be on hiatus by the time it does air for a little bit, but you can still listen to all the other episodes. Our episode is amazing. Like I've got 2 years worth of just amazing conversations with fantastic women on the journey to authenticity. And the reason it's going to go on a little hiatus is because it's just time to evolve it a little bit more, but I'm not sure to what.
And I love that you're taking that time, right? You're debunking this whole like hustle culture of like, I have to be producing and I have to be doing this and I have to, to not just shore up your own worthiness, but to just like be doing something because I got to be
Yeah.
doing something. There's a time, right, for everything. There is a time for rest. There's a time for evolve because in that resting, that's when you're evolving. You're still growing, even if we're not like actively like in therapy or this or that, like we're still growing and learning and changing and things are life is just going to continue to happen and come to us and force us to have awarenesses and awakenings and all this. So I commend you for taking a break.
Well, thank you. And it's
Yeah.
really hard to do that. And yet it also has helped me heal, right? It's because for 40 plus years, I've been go, 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 always, never really slowing down. That's been the beauty of the last few months is to really go into that deep reflection and it's healing. My body's like, thank you. Thank you. And I'm sleeping. Hormones help too, but
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
sleeping.
Yeah. Definitely. And yeah. And then when you re-emerge on the public forum sector, right, and share all of this,
Mhm.
it's going to be awesome, right? Because you're giving yourself the time to then grow to have more to offer people,
Mhm. Yeah.
right?
I wanna
So
meet them where they're at, but I gotta be in a good space myself and
yeah,
surrounding myself with people like you and just really, you know, it's been very helpful on my journey.
that's
So
great.
thank you.
Thank you so much. And so do you have any last bit of wisdom or anything that you want to share?
I
You've shared
do.
so much, but yeah,
I
let's
know, I feel like we've covered a lot. There's a quote that my mom used to always tell me, and so much I believe in it that I tattooed it on my arm, and it's, "This too shall pass."
mhm.
And I think it's always important to remember that whatever it is, if it passes like a kidney stone, if it passes, it's hard, but that's the beauty of time. Everything keeps moving. And so regardless of how hard it is and how messy and that feeling that, oh man, is this ever going to pass? It does eventually.
Mhm,
It shall
mhm.
pass. And how you receive it and how it changes you, whatever it is, that's on you.
Thank you for that. We say that quote in recovery too, and
Oh, I didn't know
I
that.
love that because it reminds me that yes, it's the shit that's gonna pass at some point, but it's also the good stuff that's gonna pass. So,
Yeah.
right, it's like, oh, welcoming or stepping into the tide, stepping into the
Well,
flow. That it's gonna be good, and then it's gonna be bad. It's gonna be good. It's gonna be bad, and that nothing ever stays the same.
nope.
And
Nope. It
not
shall.
and not get so attached to like one thing, whether it's oh, I'm always gonna feel like this sucks, or oh, it's always gonna be great. That's the
Yeah.
reality of being again, being a human is that whole,
It's
uh,
all of it.
spectrum
Yeah. Yeah.
spectrum of
You get
everything.
to feel all of it. And in some ways, once you accept that, there's freedom in that, I believe,
Totally.
because you just focus in that moment, in your present moment of, "Okay, I'm gonna enjoy this now, or this is gonna suck now, but either way, it's gonna be different, and that's okay."
Yes. Yes. I love it. I love you, Diane. You are
Love
amazing. So
you.
I will put all of your links and everything down in the description for people to check out your website, sign up for her newsletter because once she's ready to strike, she's going to come
Yes.
at you guys. So awesome. Thank you so much for being with us
Oh,
today.
thank you for having me on your show. It's wonderful and always good to catch up.
Yes. All right. I'll talk to you soon.